It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Friday, March 14th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that thinks it's so nice to get back into the winning column.
Yeah, it feels good for everybody.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. I've been podcasting about the Flyers, the NHL, and hockey for a decade. I'm here with prospect expert and Flyers credentialed reporter for 19 years, Russ Cohen. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. To keep up with our latest episode and Flyers news, you can find us at Locked On Flyers on all your favorite socials. And of course, here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, we did see some changes to the lineup, not all the ones we wanted, but we saw some of them. I think the main one being moving Travis Konecny up to that top line, breaking up the Cates line a little bit and moving Brink around. But that actually seemed to work okay on the Brink side of things, at least, right?
Yeah, on the Brink side, it was really good. I mean, that was probably his best game in months. So that was a big deal. And so yeah, he looked good. He was a little more confident. The first goal helped for sure. With
Mm.
connecting, it took him a while to get things going. I mean, on defense, he's not even aggressive now, where he used to try and like make the other team turn the puck over, things like that. He's not even trying for those plays. And then he picked up a little steam at the end of the game, and then it was like, you know what? the 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 goal that didn't go in for the shootout, that's like the hockey gods. Like that's all I
I
could expect.
know. That was so you're just like, I don't even know what to say to that. Watching it bounce off like all three posts.
That was crazy.
Absolutely crazy. But I do think he did pick it up late in the game. So that's good to see, and maybe that'll carry over. One of the other things we did want to see was maybe another call up, get Anthony Richard up instead of Nick Delorier. That did not happen. And Nick Delorier was like a non issue in this game. And I think that it really hurt Abels and Peltier. They did not get enough ice time, either
No.
one of them. And we need to be seeing these guys. Yeah. Yeah, I was really frustrated by that. And I think, all things being equal, I would still trade that for the success that that third line had in this game. I think, obviously Ryan Paling, it was nice for him to get some redemption after that breakaway did not go, right?
Yep. Yeah, that was a really good stick move. It showed that okay, maybe the injury that sort of happened the other day or the bad hit kind of like didn't carry over. So I was happy about that.
Absolutely. And then Ole Lycksell, I think, really thrived on that line and really showed what he can do and what his game is overall in this game.
Yeah, this was a big game, a multi-point game. He really was skating great out there. He was a catalyst. You hope that this is something where now he could put these together and give the coach confidence in him, because I think that's the only thing that's lacking. It's not like Ole can't play or anything.
Right, and they mentioned on the broadcast, which I know you did not hear because you were at the game, but they did mention that this is the first extended look he'll potentially get, and I'm screaming at my TV saying, "Yes, that's what we've been begging for." Is like, we don't know what he could be at because you haven't given him that extended look, and I think if he has confidence right now that he's gonna stick around for a while, this is the product that he can show, and again, he may be a bottom sixer, but that's still a guy that can contribute and do things like he did tonight.
Yeah, complimentary offensive player. You trying to tell me that team doesn't need it? Come on.
Yeah. Now, on the defensive side of things, Rasmus Ristolainen was out of the lineup, banged up a little there. My conspiracy theory hat says that had something to do with the trade deadline non decision there, but I'm going to let that go. In the meantime, I do think that Emil Andre had a solid, if not remarkable game.
Yeah, I thought he was really good out there for sure, and again should still be in the lineup. Like I don't see a reason to pull him out of the lineup anytime soon. So it was nice to see. It shows what he can do. You give him 3 or 4 games, and he'll, and he's all of a sudden he's really comfortable, right? So that's what you want.
Yeah, and I thought we saw a little bit more of a kick out of Travis Sanheim's game, than we had seen in a little bit.
Yeah, I think there was a little upturn there. I agree with you on that, and that's good because I think he played a lot in the four nations, and I think that took a toll a little bit.
Right. Then, of course, I think, one of the biggest things that we've been talking about, we're going to talk about it more later in the show when we talk a little bit more about John Tortorella and his potential future with the Flyers. But Sam Ersson in net, I would say, was pretty good.
I give him a C. Like he
Yeah, I
wasn't
mean, it
wasn't
wasn't great, but I would say pretty good. Good enough to win.
yeah, good enough to win. He made some saves in the shootout. Uh,
Mhm.
we'll see if he could string some wins together.
Yeah, I think that'll be the big issue for him is like, can he win out moving forward and make that one extra big save that we keep talking about here. So yeah, that's a to be continued there for sure. Not a lot of data on the power play there, but in the one power play they had, I thought the puck movement was a little better.
On the one, and then the other one, it was like they didn't do anything.
Yeah,
So it was
yeah.
like, and then in this game, it didn't cost them, but it does show how so many times the power play does cost them.
Yeah, I think so. But I do think Mitchkov had some really strong moments in this game. And one of the things that we have talked about with him as of late is just letting him go, right? Letting him do his thing. And I feel like they did that in this game. He did a little bit of the cheating that he likes to do, but not too much of it that it caused a
Yeah,
problem. And I think he tried to do his own plays. He gets that fantastic shootout goal when it counts, and I just really feel like he was contributing in a very effective way throughout this game, including, I think, elevating Couturier's game a little bit.
yeah, he definitely elevated Couturier's game. I think he had more confidence in this one than the last few, so that was good. And shockingly, the coaching staff even put Couturier out for that face-off,
Yeah,
first off in overtime, which is like just something we've screamed about for
a
many.
miracle, a miracle. Now, of course, it didn't lead to anything. I thought that overtime was there was some good stuff in it, but man, I just felt like the possession strategy wasn't
Oh,
100% there.
no, I agree. There was one point where Tampa was just circling. I think Victor Hedman had like a 2-minute shift.
Well, and then Konecny had a corresponding 2-minute shift, and,
That,
he did have that burst of energy, but it went nowhere, and then he almost dished off the puck to nowhere, and that was bad.
that
But
was bad.
but
But
he
that was
was gassed. Yeah, yeah, that was a tough one, but yeah, I think overall a win against a team like Tampa is very,
yep.
very good. It's
Oh yeah.
something to build on. We are going to preview the game coming up next against Carolina later in the show. That's another tough opponent.
It is another tough opponent. They're going to have a defense that's going to be hard to break through, and they'll have to work on that.
Yep. All right. Well, we are going to talk about that game later in the show. Up next, we're going to talk about John Tortorella and what the future may hold for him with the Flyers. If you're like me, your mornings have to start off with a good cup of coffee, but I got tired of settling for basic grocery store pods that just weren't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade, and let me tell you, their coffee is next level. Trade is the number one specialty coffee marketplace in the US, bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. I found a local Philadelphia roaster that I had always wanted to try, and my first bag was a game changer. It had such a smooth flavor. I could actually taste the difference from my usual coffee, and their subscriptions make it so easy. There's no more last minute grocery store runs or settling for whatever's on the shelf. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. Drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl.
March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. I would bet on University of Houston, my alma mater. FanDuel app is simple and easy to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long.
On Monday's show, we will, of course, recap the game against Carolina, which we're going to preview later today. And we will have our nemesis of the week. Now, last show, we talked a little bit about John Tortorella and kind of what's going on with him right now. We had talked on Wednesday's show about the team's to-do list for the remainder of the season that involved, evaluating the coaching staff and figuring out what the next steps there are. And there's a little more to the coaching conversation as a whole, as well as what's going on with Tortorella, because it has been very noticeable that he's been a little bit more short, a little bit, for John Tortorella, of
Right.
course, a little bit less forthcoming. And just in terms of his enthusiasm or thoughtfulness, I would say it's been a little bit lower since Four Nations.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it goes from not talking to Cam York to looking every time that first goal goes in against him, he looks worse and worse on the bench. To other comments that we'll talk about a little later, you could see that it's taking a little bit of a toll on him. It is.
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to tell. Like, is this just a normal season grind and we're at that point and it's clear they're not making the playoffs? So is it just that, or is there more to it? And I think, that whole thing about Cam York and then Chris Pronger's reply to it about, bringing up the benching of Couturier from last year and
Right.
everything around that. Like, is there more churn this year about him and how he relates to players, or is this just normal? It's like sometimes that's hard to tell with Torts.
Yeah, I mean, covering him as long as I did, I think this is more churn because I think this is the normal thing that happens when John pushes you to your absolute limit every minute. And like last year, hey, you almost made the playoffs. You lost on the last day. Okay. Well, now you're out of it a lot further and he's still pushing you the same way. That's when the churn starts happening.
Right. And just coincidentally, we had planned to have this conversation, a couple days ahead of time here, but coincidentally, John Tortorella yesterday after morning skate was asked about some of these issues on the periphery that kind of add to this conversation. And, he talked about some of the things that we brought up on our last couple of shows, especially post trade deadline, about the plan and call ups and all of that. So, he said that he feels for the team, especially the guys who have been here for all 3 years of his tenure. They put in the work and the results haven't been there. And it's hard sometimes as players to watch other teams like ramping up for the playoffs. And you're like, well, year two, it was very clear that this was going to be a rebuild, John, and you
Correct.
stayed. You
Right.
chose to stay. So,
Right.
like, what do you want?
This is every fan expected this. Now, expectations were definitely raised a little last year, but
Right.
I think expectations got back to normal mid-year of this year. So, yeah, this is still the way the plan was supposed to be.
Tort said that he thought the deadline moves were absolutely the right thing to do, that you have to think big picture and stay patient. And, he tries to be as transparent with his players about where the team is in the process and kind of work hand in hand with Danny Briere making sure the players are informed and show the players respect, right? In terms of, like Briere saying he's been in constant conversation with Scott Lawton prior to the deadline to make sure he was aware of
Right.
the possibility of him being traded and all of that.
Sure.
But now, like, you look at all that and say, sure, but it still doesn't provide transparency for us, which I understand you can't to a large degree. You have to keep some conversations private, but it's really hard on the outside to try and suss out like how he really feels about this team.
So to me, it's a twofold thing. If you want to deliberately hold it from the media, like sometimes he does, okay, but then you're not telling the fans, and the fans are paying the bill, and the fans are wondering, should I re-up my season tickets? Well, I don't know because I don't know what's going on the team. Well, why do I not know what's going on in the team? Because the coach won't tell me.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting because I do think Torts is correct sometimes when he says this is a Danny
Sometimes,
Briere question, right?
yeah,
Because there are things that are
correct.
under Danny Briere's purveyance, and in terms of the holistic look at the team and roster moves and all of that, that is a Danny Briere question, right?
Hmm.
But where I may diverge from that take a little bit is when we're talking about call ups and giving
Right.
guys opportunities. And I think that is a joint effort between the two. And Torts said as much. And it's really, really interesting that given, everything we said about the call ups and evaluations and how important that is, that they have not discussed anyone beyond who is already up. He said exactly that yesterday. It's a joint, I think, responsibility for Briere and Torts, like I said. But aside from calling up Emil Andre and Rodrigo Abels and Olle Lycksell, there hasn't been a conversation about any other call-ups yet.
Right. So let's just assume that if fans never watched this show on Tuesday and they know nothing about the Phantoms, and you have season tickets and you know the team's in a rebuild, well, you're asking yourself a question. Aside from a few players that are in junior hockey and maybe one or two overseas, why are the Flyers so short on talented players? They're supposed to be rebuilding. Where are the players? That's the perception when a coach gives that information out. So you know what? Baloney. There's players you can call up to get looks at.
Right. And, we talked earlier in the show today about the fact that Nick Delorier is still in the lineup
Right.
here
Why
and
is he
and,
there?
and that it should at the very least be Anthony Richard on that fourth line,
Correct.
right? That we talked about
Minimally.
minimally, right? But there's other guys that could
Yes,
potentially call up. And the fact that they haven't, I think that's a combination of a failure on Briere and Torts'
it
part
is.
here. And it's something that has to be under
We talked
consideration.
about it last year, how it wasn't happening enough, but they did hang on in the playoff race. So we all wrote it off to that. And
Right.
now it should have been happening already.
Right. And I think, the other thing that came up yesterday, which is, again, is a huge topic for the Flyers and their future, is the goaltending.
Oh yeah.
And, we have talked ad nauseum about the problem there. And interestingly, the Athletic put out their goalie tandem rankings, and the Flyers are dead last in the NHL.
I mean,
Not unexpectedly.
nobody should be
Right.
surprised at that. But the problem is so like when a fan sees that and says, well, who's coaching the goalies? Okay, well, Kim Dillabaugh is, and he's been there a long time. Why is he still there? Why is he so good? These are questions that the fans are going to ask. And they're
Right.
legitimate questions because you are a rebuilding team. You're going to need goaltending.
Right. And I think, that goes back to the John Tortorella issue of he doesn't know anything about goalies. That's a Kim Dillabaugh thing, but Kim Dillabaugh is never available for us to
Correct.
ask questions to. So how do we know what is going on other than the tireless work of some of the beat reporters who are there every day at practice and can report on some things going on, but they don't know what goes on behind closed doors either. So I think that is a big question, and I think Tortorella ultimately, if you have the worst goaltending tandem in the NHL, you have to own that to some degree, and I don't think he does.
No, I don't think he does either. We know he's frustrated about it,
Yes.
but that's it. Like we don't know anything else, and no fans don't know anything else, and the reporters don't know anything else. So we only know what we see, and we can only report on what we see. And we've talked about it, and I've talked about it, and I've said things that weren't popular, but here we are. So clearly we were right to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that brings us to the question of, is there more of a chance that Torts leaves the Flyers at the end of this season versus next season? And, I think it's more possible than it was. I think I
Yeah.
have maintained that John Tortorella was going to walk away and retire at the end of his contract at the end of next season. I think that is the likely scenario, unless the Flyers made some huge turnaround next season that he wants to stick around for. But if it's still sort of a rebuilding kind of year next year, to me, Tortorella doesn't have incentive to stay past the end of his contract, and he can retire and go spend time with the dogs. And that's great for him.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I do think that maybe the chances have increased slightly at this point that that happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I'm about 60% he's gone based on
After this year?
after this year. Based on now, it doesn't mean he doesn't get bumped upstairs and has another role. But I
Right,
mean, gone from coaching. I think he doesn't really want to rebuild. He didn't really want to rebuild last year either, and didn't have to because they were in it.
right.
The first year, sure, that's fine. First little while. But now it's like he doesn't want to call anybody up, so he doesn't really want to deal with any of that. And next year, he's not going to be able to get a goaltending change here. He could talk to Danny, but we've talked about the goaltending market. There's almost nothing you could do except maybe a offer sheet to Devin Levi, and he probably wouldn't look at that as a big positive, only because he's unproven. So I think he's looking at the same thing next year, and I think that's going to weigh heavily on him.
I know, and we have a lot more to talk about with this for sure, and that'll continue as we get closer to the end of the season. And obviously, when the end of the season hits, we'll probably know sooner rather than later what that decision might be. So, should be a very fascinating couple of months here for the Flyers. In the meantime, we got another game on Saturday to talk about. That is against the Carolina Hurricanes. We're going to preview that coming up next. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's sometimes easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It's not just a budgeting app. Monarch Money is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan those long term goals. And you'll find things you never knew about your spending habits, like maybe all those subscriptions you have and didn't know about. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. You can use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, so the Carolina Hurricanes, we talked a little bit about them when we were previewing the Tampa game, just because they had played each other pretty recently, and that the main point was that Carolina was playing with a chip on their shoulders following the trade deadline and the whole Mikko Rantanen drama, and I think that's still the case. They were on a 5-game winning streak, 7-3 in their last 10 and 7-2 since the Four Nations break. And I think, looking back at the past matchups, they were in November, different times for both teams, but Carolina did win both of those matchups. The Hurricanes are currently second in the Metro, and I feel like they're kind of stuck in that spot because there's really no chance to catch the Washington Capitals, and the Devils are kind of in this weird no man's land. And so who knows what's going to happen there, but I don't see the Canes sinking to that level anytime soon.
No, I don't either, but I'm not sure they're a strong playoff team either. I look at their
Yeah,
top line, and their top line's weak. I mean, no offense to Jackson Blake, but I mean, he's a rookie.
right.
I watched him in college. He's a good player. He's not a great player. I don't think he'll ever be a great player, but he's a good player. He'll be a useful, good NHLer, but you're putting him on the top line. If I'm the Flyers and knowing that that exists. I'm going to be really physical and trying to really press when they have their top line out there and really test that whole top line. Because with Jarvis and Aho, that is not the most physical or big line that you could have in the NHL. So if they adjust their lines accordingly, they can maybe get some make some headway against that line. And just, Kochekov is a good goalie. Like if he's the guy in net, I get it. That's Anderson's prone to more bad goals, I think, than Kochekov, but I think he does stop the shots you're supposed to stop more than Kochekov. And I think that's the difference between them.
Yeah, going back to the lines that you
Yes.
were talking about. So the reason why Blake got moved up is because Andrei Svechnikov is injured. And, we don't know as of recording what his status will be on Saturday, but he and Dmitry Orlov were out versus
Yeah.
Tampa on Tuesday. Looks like Orlov is going to be back tonight for them as they face the Detroit Red Wings tonight. So it seems like Orlov is good to go, but Svech is going to be out versus Detroit. So chances are not high that Svechnikov will be in the game against the Flyers.
And that's a guaranteed
So
goal off the board because he almost always
Mhm.
scores against Philly, just about every time.
That is correct. Now, what that does mean is that it's a slightly depleted but still very talented Carolina team in the second half of a back-to-back against the Flyers here. And so I think there's opportunity here, but again, this is a very talented team here, and they're still trying to figure out Logan Stankoven and where he
Yeah.
fits in there, especially on the power play. They've been mixing and matching
But
things
they
up,
don't know what they
especially
are at the moment, and I think that's why you can
right.
kinda catch them. They have really good puck movers and a good defense, that's still good, and Scott Morrow's a very good defenseman, even though he may not be a hardened pro, he could play. So,
Right.
defensive.
So, but going back to Stankoven
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the integration there, I think that's been part of that issue, to
Mhm.
your point, because they've been mixing and matching the power play units to try and figure out, and especially with Svechnikov out, like how all of that is going to work. And I think that you're right, like catching them in this little bit of disarray, but yet they're winning all these games because again, they have this chip on their shoulders, but how
Mhm.
long can that chip last? Right.
Right. I think that is gonna run out. It might run out in the playoffs. Maybe you're right. Maybe it'll last the regular season. But I just feel like there's opportunities here because they are kind of in between. They're in between on these
Yeah.
lines. They're in between on these defensive pairs a little bit. So the only thing that's sticking to the plan is their goaltending tandem, the way they do it, because they've been doing that for all year. But everything else has changed.
There's been huge changes here, I think that to some degree losing Drury and Natchez earlier in that original deal that got them Mikko Rantanen, it's still an adjustment for this team because those two were a big part of what had made the team successful earlier in the season. So, and those were important players to
Oh,
the community of the team.
especially on the power play. Like Netchus was a big
Yeah.
deal on their power play, and their power play numbers have dropped as a result. And Drury's a very good penalty killer, but they have other
Mhm.
guys that can penalty kill. But the Netchus loss on the power play is massive. And especially
Right.
since Rantanen didn't fill that hole, now you have nobody to fill that hole.
Yeah. Now, because of all of those stats earlier in the season, I think the Canes are still very good on the penalty kill, to your point. They're
Yes.
second in the NHL on the PK. But a lot of the numbers behind those stats are from earlier in the season when they had those guys. So, grain of salt, but still very, very good on the penalty kill. Their power play, though, is almost as dreadful as the Flyers, which is like, I think that's a huge deal for this team as they're trying to ramp up and get in position to go into the playoffs.
I agree. I mean, this is one time where if you're putting them on the power play, you're not as worried as other teams they've been facing on this homestand.
Yeah, I think so as well. But a very good defensive squad, only
Yes.
a 2.68 goals against per game played team, which is, really tough for the Flyers to compete against, defensively. For the Canes here, it's not going to be as difficult a challenge, but the Flyers have to figure out a way around that.
They do. You have to overcome it. You have to. Again, I think they need to do a little bit better with puck possession. They definitely have to get guys to the net better. I think some games that's waned a bit. If they get power plays, they have to be better with their zone entries. You can't just lose the puck and never really get set. It just derails and kills the whole power play.
Right. And so I think, this is just one of those games where the Flyers are going to have to be a little bit more north south than they
Yes.
usually are.
Yeah, no doubt.
And
I mean, that's Bryn More hockey. How do you break that? That's how.
exactly. So should be a fun one for the Flyers to end the homestand here. And we will talk about it on Monday's show, plus have our nemesis of the week. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got mailbag questions or Flyers thoughts, let us know on any of our socials at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment on our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology on those same socials, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast. It brings you daily league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage you love from Locked On. I'm there each and every Friday. You can find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.